in 1 week.
Yes.
It's coming up so soon. I'm so excited.
All right. We're on the starting screen, and there is Manda waiting for us. Hi,
Hello,
Manda.
lovelies. She's always right on the ball. There she is.
At least we know we have one person watching.
There's 4. It says 4. That's
Uh,
including me and you and Manda and one other person.
oh my goodness. I'll give it a minute, and then we will show our lovely faces as we get ready to do another week of, or continuing the first full week of the takeover.
Hello. Yes, we are officially unsupervised. Rob and I.
Yep. Mistakes were made.
No mistakes are being made here. Do you know what I mean? This is like, just think of this episode for all of you guys that are here with us tonight. Think of this episode like Vegas. What happens on unsupervised Loremasters stays on unsupervised Loremasters.
Does that mean we have to quit the video, destroy the video afterwards? How does this work?
Maybe. We'll just wait and see. We don't want to get there too quickly. We're gonna wait a little bit and then we'll see. Mostly unsupervised. Amanda, we're gonna ask you to turn a blind eye today. If that's cool. Hey Keith.
All
Hey
right, let us
Rory.
show our lovely faces. So, hello, everyone. Glad you could make it here to be with us today on Loremaster Arcanum number 124, where we are going to be discussing story arcs. I am joined by my fantastic co-host, Vivi. Vivi, how you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I am wonderful. It's great to be here with you. And yeah, as has been mentioned, we have been left unsupervised. So yeah, bring out the dinos. You know, dinosaurs are highly encouraged. We're good with that. Sorry, John.
Sorry, not sorry.
This is the
We are
No
not
Apologies tour. Oh, so
No
when you mentioned, when we say the word story arcs, what comes to mind for you?
I don't know. So story arcs for me, I think my mind first off always goes as a DM in regards to story arcs, never not really necessarily as a character usually when I'm thinking about story arcs because I think that's part of being a dungeon master, right? And if you're doing any kind of homebrew stuff, that's typically where you're worrying a lot about more of the story arc than you are in a module kind of campaign.
So I have to ask, did you intentionally mean to tease next week's LMA where we will be discussing character story arcs?
Maybe.
Just go with it. Yes.
We got it. We're fine. That's totally right. That's exactly what I was trying to do.
Oh, wow. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as a DM, when you're planning on doing a new campaign, I would have to imagine that probably the most nerve-wracking part, especially if you're a new DM, or newer DM anyway. And I can tell you this even as a long time DM, my bones are creaking as I say that. Uh, you know, it's a bit nerve-wracking trying to come up with the story arc. Vivi, is it possible for you to up your microphone slightly?
I'm looking at it right now.
Actually, you know something? If not, I think I can do it here. I left some room in the audio output capture. So
okie dokie. We can figure it out. Thank you, Amanda, for letting us know. We will work on that shortly. Okay, so sorry, you were saying about as a DM?
yes. Yeah, so I mean, it's got to be kind of maybe a bit unnerving if you're trying to do a homebrew campaign and you're, you know, of all the things that you have to consider, the story is really probably, I would say, number one on your mind.
I would think so too, because I think in the very beginning when I first started to DM and started to do some homebrew stuff, I think that's kind of where I struggled the most about having a story arc that was attention grabbing enough, I guess, or entertaining enough for your players? Like,
Mhm.
does that hit that arc that's kind of like that aha moment or whatever? Like, how big does a story arc necessarily have to be? Um, in regards to that as a DM, like as a DM, your mind's you're always your own toughest critic. So I mean, like maybe to you the story arc isn't as big, but maybe your players found it amazing. So I think that's kind of a hard balance for me, finding a story arc that I feel is a good enough story arc for my characters.
Sure. I that perfectly understandable. I should mention that Keith mentioned, he for story arcs he thinks of comic book series that go over several books, and that's certainly true. That is, uh, I mean, it can be several books. Sometimes I think that more of a character arc. Though if it's a like a crossover series, then there's the wider story.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's you're trying to figure out. You want your character. I mean, obviously, you want your players to have fun. Um, and I think what we might want to look at here is, some of the details. It's first you have the concept. You have what kind of story do you want to tell. But then there is, well, how do you get from here to there? Yeah, how do you
Yes.
break it down? And what are some of the things, what are some of the things that you're looking at for, let's say the ending? What are some of the things that you'd want to consider for the ending?
Right, or like the outcome of how you
Sure.
want it to look. But also your players are also, you know what I mean, can change that in a homebrew as well if you're kind of leaning towards a certain direction and then maybe, your players go this way instead of that way. You know all about that, Robert.
That's when you take the idea that you had and you put it aside, so because you can always use it again somewhere down the road.
Yes, and then you do story arcs, and then you do a different story arc.
uh,
That's awesome. So what about you, Robert, in regards to being a long-term like DM and stuff like that running over time? Like, do you find story arcs difficult for you to write or are they pretty easy?
um, I think the main concern is, for me, the tough part is having done it for so long, I have to remind myself of, have I done this before? Have I done it for the same group of players? It's trying to make sure that it's okay to reuse stuff. I mean, you play long enough, you're going to probably end up reusing stuff, but trying to come up with an idea that is somewhat fresh. Um, and one that's going to fit the kind of game, we talk about session zeros and talking to your players and figuring out, what kind of game do you want to run, what kind of game are they looking for, and making sure that there's a mesh there. um but I think the main thing for me, and Dark Elf Twilight mentioned always been more into story beats and story arcs, and I agree with you in the extent that story beats are important. I think the story beats play into the story arcs, which we'll get to,
At
in a
some
bit.
point.
At some
We'll
point,
figure
yes,
it out.
I promise you, we will get to story beats. Um, but I think in general, I have an idea. Like I'll have an idea of what's the final outcome in terms of, is there a big bad to defeat? Uh, is there an end to a journey that they need to complete?
Mhm.
Um, is it, and it may be a campaign. If it's an open-ended campaign, there may be no finale.
Yeah.
So, a story arc is not, the end of the story arc is not, and I kind of purposely put it as story arcs, not so much because of having different story arcs, but to show that, it's just parts of the journey along the way. I think a good example of this is when you have a series of novels, and you have that first book, and that first book introduces you a bit to the world, to the characters. Usually there's some, big bad at the end of the first book. It may or may not be the final. The person that the big bad that you at the thing may have no relation to the final big bad. Um, as a matter of fact, it it may feel like a self-contained adventure, and you kind of get a feel for everything that's going on. Um, but it's just the start, and
Right.
then you build onto that.
And I think that was a good point that you brought up, Robert, about how the story arc doesn't necessarily have to just go in one direction or whatever. Like there's room for change and movement within that story arc as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if and this is one of those cases where, um, yeah, it may not go where you want to get at the end, especially if you're doing a more sandbox style game. Um,
Hmm.
where you get to at where you want to be at the end, who you see as the ultimate, what do you see as the ultimate conclusion to the overall story, may not be a straight there's nothing saying it has to be a linear jump from A to B to C to D.
And it never is. If you have played D&D, it never is. And if you out there have had, as a DM, have had a campaign that has players who have gone from point A to point B without squirreling all around, I applaud you and congratulations. And what is that like?
uh
I think like a good point that you're talking about with story arcs too, about how like you say, like in book series, I kind of like how you um related the story arc much to like a book series and not necessarily needing a beginning and end in maybe like the first, X amount of sessions or whatever. And that could be, like you say, as you say, room for the characters to develop and grow and the world to develop and grow, to have more driving force behind the reasoning of possibly potentially the story arc, right? Like
mhm.
a good example is in Greyhawk, with Hamlet, and them, the people and the characters getting accustomed and used to Hamlet and building that story there and building relationships there in order for that story arc to really hit its peak at the end of book one.
Sure.
No,
uh,
no spoilers. I
we
mean, it's
we
been a long time. If you haven't caught up by now, just kidding.
uh, yeah, it if you haven't caught up by now, please do, and you will. It's very definitely worth watching.
Yes.
Many feels. So
Yes, of course.
trying to define story arcs.
Okay. Do you have an article up? I can look.
I do not. I did not bring articles for this only because a lot of times I read some of these articles and I'm just like, okay, that's
Yeah. Okay, so in general, let's just look at I just googled it quickly. So it says a story arc is called a narrative arc and it's just a term for the plot of your story. The line that your story follows from beginning to end is called an arc because of rising peak and falling and falling in falling action. It runs from the beginning through the middle and to the end of the story. So that's what like a Google definition of story arc would be. This one is a nice one because it says like the setup, and then it arcs all the way up to the climax, and then it comes down to success or failure, and then the action, and then the resolution. So I mean, like any good story would have some sort of driving force arc, big
sure.
bad, however you purpose and reasoning of why you're there, what you're doing, and vice versa, things like that.
And I should note, like, one of the things that I like to do is, for a story arc, the first one I keep pretty simple. It's there's you're introducing the characters to each other, the characters to the world. You're kind of setting up who their first antagonists are.
Yes.
Not necessarily the big bad or even a big bad, just who are the who is helping drive the story other than the player's actions themselves. um who is who are their friends, who are their allies in this, who are the people they're helping, um and just getting a feel for feeling out the players and the characters a bit to see what they respond to, because you want to be somewhat nimble in terms of being able to shift if something's not working, figuring something else out. And because I mean, you kind of want to make sure that you are driving the story forward, but in a way that the players feel like it's a result of what they're doing and not you forcing them there. You know me, I hate rails.
Yes.
I react
Me
very,
too.
react very badly to them both, especially as a player. So I
Yes.
avoid them. You know, it's all like crazy as
Like
a
the plague.
DM. Yes,
I agree too. I don't really like feeling like I'm pushing my characters per se in a certain direction. I think personally for me a good story arc would be um giving a reason for your characters and your players to want to achieve this end goal. Do you know what I mean? And not because they have to, or not because, this is a game and okay, well that seems like that's the right way to go, so I guess we'll go that way. You know what I mean? Like figure out
absolutely,
what their drive is and them as a character and their background, and kind of tying in those kinds of important things to their character, to the story, to have that drive and push to want to continue on.
exactly. So I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here. Can you
No. Just
think?
kidding.
Aha! uh,
Can I think of what?
can you think of like a story arc that you've done? And when I say story, I'm talking like one of the smaller ones as opposed to an overarching story.
Um, a story arc I think I could bring up possibly was when I first started to DM and started to do a homebrew on my own. I had a guy, his name was Thalmar, and he was initially, so it was supposed to be just a one shot, a homebrew one shot that my players loved so much that they wanted to turn into a story. And I was realizing as a DM, I don't need to write my whole entire story before I can tell it. It can be written as it goes. I figured out that the hard way. But I kind of had a baseline of what, and this is kind of a little bit dabbling into what Dark Elf is saying, Dark Elf's question here. I did have a somewhat of a loose pre-planned story arc in regards to their story. And I kind of quickly wrote it. The guy who ended up supposed to be asking for help was actually going to betray them at the end. So they were helping him essentially. He was the big bad the whole time, and they were supposed to. They ended up at the end. They were supposed to be like have this big huge aha moment where it's like you're the bad guy this whole time, and we've been helping you this whole time. And I think as a beginner DM and just having somebody or having to write homebrews for the first time, the thought and the idea of the story arc was there, but I felt like there needed to be more behind it to really drive the story, aka like the reasoning why he was like what was his drive, what was his purpose, why did he want to do XYZ and whatever. That was I think a lot of the issues I had as a DM with in regard to story arc and really making it a worthwhile story to tell or a worthwhile adventure for them to follow.
Sure. I think that goes into, you know, as far as like the setting that you do and how much detail that you do ahead of time. Having
Yes.
having an idea of what everybody's motivations are, even if it's a quick one line thing that you
Yeah.
can build off of later, is a great way to go. Um, it brings to mind when I did my 5e campaign over over the course of the lockdown. The first story arc, the players started off at basically not a funeral, but the kind of reading of a will at the end of a funeral. For someone who was a mentor to some of them, was helping a couple of
Oh.
them, and it the initial story turned out that people that were supposedly related to her that she had not left in the anything to in the will uh, decided to take a very very militant approach to contesting the will,
That makes sense.
and it was the first story arc really consisted of the players trying to figure out what was going on, because there was definitely more to it. The woman who had passed was a mage, and one of the player characters was her apprentice, and who was becoming a mage, and she was helping some of the other characters as well. So they were just trying to figure out what was up with these people. And in turn, then they had their own personal character arcs, but that's again story for next week. Um, and they found out eventually that there was a lot more to the story, which brings me to back to second for as far as like on a campaign scale and writing story arcs. Um, and this kind of goes to story beats a bit. Twilight. The idea is, knowing where you want them to end up kind of requires there's a few things that go into that. One, you kind of need to know where they're supposed to be from a purely logistical standpoint, level wise.
Yes.
I
You're
mean,
not
if you're
gonna throw
starting at level
level
one,
3 into a beholder cave or something.
right? If you're starting them at level one, and your final combat is meant to be level 10, level 20, anywhere in between, you're going to need to figure out how, what's the pace of leveling, and how many stories you're going to need in between, to hit that mark.
I
Um,
have a good
good.
Sorry, go ahead, Robert. Oh, I was just gonna say, if you want to finish your thought, I just was gonna read the question from Amanda because I also too have the same question.
Story beats, and there may be a better definition than this to me. Story beats are those things that you're expecting to happen along the way in some kind of cadence. Now, from a D&D standpoint, um, cadence, this hitting story beats with in a certain cadence may or may not be an issue at all. If your players are honestly, if your players are enraptured with the world, with the story, with the NPCs, they may take their sweet time to getting to the different beats that you want to hit, but you want to have those things that kind of need to happen, and figuring out how best to get the players there, or have the players find it, or find ways of making the players interested in those things happening. um I also use the idea that the bad guys have their own plan. um they're executing their plan on their schedule.
Right.
Sometimes, yeah. So where the PCs decide to engage, eh,
That's up to you, but maybe a town might be destroyed because you're too busy looking at that pretty rock over there, you know?
absolutely. It's one of those things where, so you have those story beats that you want to make sure, mostly to help drive the story. They're things that are going to help. There's going to be those points where they're going to find that additional information. They're going to start to see the bigger picture, maybe, or figure out who their next target is, or
Mm.
where they need to be.
Oh, okay, and that's the difference between a story beat and a story arc. So the
Yeah,
beats
because I
are more
mean,
like kind of just
right.
progression along the way. Okay.
Because the story arc kind of like with the story arc, even though there's an end, kind of an end to a story arc, it may not be a hard set ending, but you kind of wrap up that section of it. Like, if
Yeah.
you've again, we go back to the book series. You may finish the one book, and whatever the theme of that particular book was, it's kind of wrapped up. It's not completely done because there's more to the story, but you're on to the next book, where things are going to feel different.
Yeah.
You've hit that particular, yeah, you can call it a checkpoint.
Yeah.
But the idea is you've kind of wrapped up one piece of the story and are moving on to the next piece of the story.
Right. Kind of end of a chapter kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Similar to if we're going back to referencing books and stuff like that, almost like an end of a chapter, kind of
Hmm.
moving on to the next chapter. Interesting. Did
Sure.
you have now I'm gonna put you on the spot, Robert. In regards to your story arcs and stuff like that, did you find a time where you kind of struggled with a story arc in your DMing
Ooh.
experience?
Um, Actually, it turned out to be that same campaign because I didn't plan, and this had more. This was more when we mentioned, where you want to be at the end. I didn't necessarily plan, and it was my first time DMing high level 5e, and I realized that the story I had in mind fell apart at higher levels.
Oh,
So
okay.
I put together something that lasted for a while so I could just reasonably wrap up character stories and call it a day because the story no longer made sense and I didn't have an idea for that high level. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really all that interested in running at that high level.
Yeah, that's fair. I think too, like as a DM, it kind of does like you mean if you're just gonna go in and smash everything and kill everything that's at that point when you're that high up, it's kind of takes the fun out of, and like that what is that where it's like the the chance of actual death that could happen. Does that make sense? Like it feels like if you're invincible and you can go and kill everything and you never have to worry about anything, is it really still fun?
Well, I mean, the problem I had was I there seemed to be like no middle ground between an encounter that my PCs were going to run over as long as they played well versus a encounter that was going to wipe them out completely.
Oh, okay.
Because they were very good at what they did. They were very tactical. The only time they really got in trouble is when they decided that when were starting to feel themselves as being invincible and started acting like it.
Mhm.
But otherwise, they were very good at planning, being very tactical, taking things, doing things, all the right things, and they had two spellcasters in the party, and it, all you need is bad rolls as a DM, and yeah, the spellcasters can ruin your day. And
Yes, for sure.
I don't want to have to plan specifically against my players, and I felt like I was going to have
No.
to do that. Yeah, that I mean, it got to that point where I was feeling like I specifically needed to find ways to nullify what they could do,
Right.
and that didn't feel good to me. So,
No, I
uh,
agree with that. Yeah. I agree with that statement. I think it's difficult, again, just trying to find that balance in the game where, and nothing's worse than you setting up this whole encounter and then it's like, "Oh, it's done in like 2 rounds." Because like everyone threw a nat 20 and there goes like 3 hours of combat that you had planned that was done in like 10 minutes. So now what are we gonna do for the next like 2 hours?
all right.
If you guys have oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, so very, very apropos to tonight's discussion, we do have a giveaway tonight. The tonight's giveaway is the Oracle Story Generator Tarot Size cards.
And they look
So
nice.
look, yeah, they look really cool. So please, the to enter is hashtag BlueBoxRPG, hashtag BlueBoxRPG, and I can see certain people already in.
Carrot size cards, yes. Long and skinny.
Did I say tarot? I thought it said tarot.
No, no tarot, but
Okay,
Pat's just being
I'm just
goofy
making
in
sure.
the carrot. He said carrot. If you guys actually, while you guys are typing in the chat, if there's anything as a player or as a DM, that you guys think that is important in regards to what makes a good story arc for you as a player or as a DM, let us know in the chat, and we can definitely discuss that as well. I think that's kind of important. I
Yeah,
think perspectives are different. I think. What do you think, Rob, in
I
regards to
absolutely.
like a
I would love to
player?
hear what our mad chatters think in terms of elements that you would think go into a story arc. We've kind of touched on a couple, but
Yes.
I'm here. I'm curious to see what the mad chatters come up with.
I can I throw a link in there? Yes, I can.
Yes, you
Okay,
can.
so there's a link to the giveaway. It is an Oracle Story Generator tarot size cards. So it says events-based story generation with over 250 million combinations per deck for all fantasy role-playing games, writers, and storytellers. So essentially, it's just a tool that you could use essentially to help you write stories and homebrews or whatever, or get ideas from them so that you can make your own stories, whether you take them right from or you kind of just take them as inspiration. Yeah, and the artwork looks beautiful. The cards look lovely. So I mean, look, and it kind of gives you, it says it gives you a keyword and a description, and then there's options and details and stuff like that. And then they look like they're really, really nice cards.
All right, excellent. So, I'd like to, while we're mentioning, we showed the
Oh,
Kickstarter link. There is another Kickstarter. There is a Kickstarter going on for one of our sponsors. Trollord Games is currently having a Kickstarter for their Adventurers Armory, and I'll show you the advertisement for a moment.
oh, nice.
It is they are last check they'd unlocked a bunch of these stretch goals. They were on their way to their latest stretch goal. I think they were at like 30, close to 32,000 last time, and the next stretch goal unlocks at 36,000. So Troller Games is one of our sponsors, and we will be having. I want to mention that this Sunday. Kurt will be running a CNC game, and I believe we are getting help in terms of hosting that. I believe Rory might be hosting it for him if he ends up having technical issues. So there will be that. There will be giveaways on Sunday for that. Not for that. There'll be Troller Games giveaways. There will also be Troller giveaways on Tuesday when I am running my one shot. I do
Ooh.
believe I still have a spot or two open if anyone is interested in playing. Please hit me or hit Manda up in Discord. Just send a whisper and let me know. All
When is
right.
that, Robert? The one that you're doing?
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday? Oh, I'm
Yes.
working on Tuesday. Boo.
Oh,
I work Tuesdays.
I
Yes,
know.
yes, they are, Pat. They are story guide cards. So it's again, like I said, like just kind of good for inspiration if you're kind of feeling like writer's block or trying to figure out where you want to go with your story or things like that. So it's really nice. Three monks walk into a bar and flips a card and a mummy appears. Could be.
Uh,
um
all right. So Mr. Slothman writes, my favorite types are the layered stories, surprises, betrayals, and you never know who you can trust.
I like plot twists. I do really like plot twists, and that's kind of what again, like what I was bringing up in that our last conversation about my homebrew. It can be very difficult to pull off as a DM sometimes, and you have to. I think, and that was like a lot of the trouble that I was dealing with. Rob, you can feel free to kind of interject if you have a thought or something that was similar. It was kind of like a breadcrumb trail where you kind of couldn't just have a plot twist out of nowhere. You almost have to leave like some sort of small breadcrumb trail when you're like, that's not too obvious, but also moments that you could look back on later and be like, oh, that's why they did this before at that one time and it was kind of weird or whatever. And I think that was one of the things that I guess that would be a story beat. Is that, am I using that correctly then? If I'm trying to leave like breadcrumbs in regards to like a possible
Um,
betrayal later down the road.
I don't know that necessarily. I think just calling it leaving breadcrumbs, not necessarily a story beat.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think the thing you need to be careful with betrayals is use it. It's kind of like a mimic. Once you use it once, the players are forever suspicious.
AKA taking 30 minutes to cross a bridge when
uh,
playing with John as a DM. Um,
or refuse to accept quests because the quest giver obviously has an ulterior motive.
yes. Um, Good point. Pat66 says that with most players, the DM has to be obvious. I agree to that as well. A lot of the times, what may be obvious to us as a DM may be very, like, not obvious to the players at all.
Uh-huh.
Uh
Yeah, it sounds fantastic in your mind, and it comes across not at all.
No, exactly. So that's kind of nice. So how do you do story arcs, or have you ever done story arcs in Friday Night Crusades in a situation where that's a little bit of a different situation because you do have people coming in and out quite frequently, so it's a little bit harder to actually get a
Uh,
whole story through there.
f
That's
f
just assumption that I'm making.
Funny story about that.
Okay.
So the players were, uh, sent to the players were specifically sent, and I did have this in mind, I just didn't know if they were going to set it off. It was one of those potential story arcs, where the players found themselves heading to the Bright Desert to, investigate a ruin that had seemingly sprung out from the sands. Um, in the course of investigating the ruin, mistakes were made, and they may or may not have raised an undead army, um,
Oh boy.
led by, a mummy king of sorts. Hey, listen, borrow from pop culture whenever you can. It's there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the funny thing was, their main thing was they got back to the city, which turns out to be the closest city to the desert, and reported what they had found. It was a question of, well, what do you do now? Because the players were in no position to do anything about it. And I kind of like threw some stuff out there in terms of while they're at a tavern, and the players kind of grabbed onto that. Next thing you know, they're in a temple of elemental evil, 100 miles to the west,
Oh
because
my
because dealing with cultists sounded a hell of a lot better than dealing with the undead army that nearly killed some of them. Even before the army came up, the what was in the first building kind of nearly killed some of them. The thing is, they're gaining levels. They're fighting this elemental cult. It's a big thing. The undead army hasn't gone away. So, you
Just so
know,
you Friday Night Crusaders are who are out there,
oh,
just
they know. They
FYI.
yeah, those who have been those who were there for are well aware of the fact that, yeah, going back east, there is an undead army that somebody's going to need to take care of.
I love how they're like, "Oh yeah, the next adventure we have is actually out east." It's like, "Oh, you know what? We don't take adventures out east anymore. We just don't go there anymore." It's not a thing we do.
So yeah, it's one of the things. Like, I mean, it goes with the idea. The players can feel free to engage with it whenever they want to. There may come a point where they have to. It's not, but at that point, they're just basically. That's when the players are more in like survival mode than anything
Right.
else.
Mhm.
Tutude suffers from object permanence.
I have a question. Let's
Here.
go on to in regards to story arcs, let's go on to getting our players and kind of wrangling our players back onto the main storyline and the main
Mhm.
story arc. Um is there situations or tools or things that you like to do that not necessarily isn't railroady, but kind of helps, guide them back onto the main track here?
This is where their backstories come well into play, because, and I mean, the easy thing is have it affect somebody from their backstory. It doesn't have to affect somebody from their backstory. It can be something. The
Mhm.
the lands that they're from are threatened. A call for help comes from one of the people. Uh, they're that's why, that's where the backstory is really, really useful. I mean, you don't want to abuse it and beat them over the head. So, you've got to go, otherwise they're all going to die. But bring those things into it. Um, there's also, there's also a matter of the relationships that they've built along the way. Sometimes I think we use NPCs, and if they're not a major NPC in the story, we forget about them.
Yes.
Try to make sure that the NPCs that you have have them meet as many as possible, and find ways to make them real to the players, so that if the whatever the main story is, it starts impacting them, the players are feeling it.
That's a good point because I've never thought about that as a DM before either. Like NPCs feel like kind of more of a throwaway or like just like, okay, you need them to feed information. But I think that's a good point that you bring up about making the importance of the NPCs to help drive the story where you do feel like it's not now it doesn't feel like it's pushing them. It's like, oh, you have a relationship with them and you're more inclined um to help or whatever, right? Like you say, like an example like Hamlet, right? Like I keep
Yeah,
going back to that because it's like we don't want to leave Hamlet. And they're like, but adventures this way, but they still need our help. And like that story and the exactly. Thank you very much, Pat. That's exactly right. John John destroying Hamlet impacted the players and the NPC controls 100%. Yes, it was very difficult. R.I.P. Federum. Oh, still so sad. Um, but yeah, I think it's just the bond and the incline where like same with Brim and Gimbal and Lilith, like they just wanted to get back to Hamlet because they knew Hamlet was in trouble and it didn't really matter about anything else. It was just let's just get back to Hamlet because our people are there and they're in danger.
sure.
So
Um,
that's a good idea with NPCs.
and that's that's what makes for a great one of the great starting areas is you get to know the people. The NPCs are real. They're not just you're not just passing by. So having like a base of operations
Hmm.
helps bring that a lot. You're able to bring those NPCs alive because the players are dealing with them more than once. It's not
Right.
just one and done.
Yes, yes, a one-time interaction. And I think a lot of the times as me as a DM, I have done that. I've been guilty of just kind of using them as like info dumps and then it's like, okay, and you're done and we'll never see you again kind of thing. But I definitely will start to implement having the importance of NPCs and using them as an asset and a tool in regards to kind of pushing the story when it does need to be pushed a little bit, not necessarily pushed, but more guided.
Sure. I mean, and you get to the idea. There's also the idea of using finding out what the character's goals are, talking to the players. What is it you want for your character? Where are they looking to be eventually? What motivates them, and using that information to motivate them. You want to, uh, it's one of the things where you want to make sure that you're not just waiting to get them, motivate them by getting them to get them back online, but
Hmm.
using motivation ongoing to find ways to tie them back to the story, so that they feel this is something that this is something that a character wants to do.
Hmm.
This is why they're here. This is what they should be doing, what they feel is the right thing to do.
Right. And again, that's a good segue to our next our next week's episode about
Character
what
arcs.
character arcs and writing character arcs. So that's really interesting. Um, what about villains? In regards to story arcs and stuff like that. Like what
Oh,
makes a good villain? And again, you guys, in the chat, feel free to share your stories or input or things like that. But yeah, like what makes for a good villain to make you that makes that character arc that helps drive that character arc, right?
for me,
Because
number one is motivation.
hmm.
As the old, the old line about the performer. What's my motivation here?
Yes.
So it's not just what the villains are doing. Why? What is it? Is it straight out conquest? It could be. I mean, sometimes just trying to stop a villain from taking over the world, or honestly, sometimes trying to stop the villain from making the world burn. That
Yes.
works.
Yes.
I mean, and there's a simplicity to it. There can also be a depth to it. They may feel it's their birthright. They may have been, the forgotten descendant of a line of kings, and they feel it's their time. I mean, they could have a hero with a twisted view on things, sure. The fallen hero has their idea. They see the world as broken and they intend to fix it by any means necessary.
Yes, I agree. Sorry, I'm laughing at Toot Toot being the villain. Wouldn't that be quite the what you call it? Plot
I
twist.
I think the party is
This whole
pretty
time.
convinced she is. That's I'm not entirely sure that's a twist anymore. They're a little
It's
concerned
just
about
become
her.
fact now. Yeah. It just becomes fact. So in regards to you say like motivation for villains, would a story beat then maybe be like some of the big bads goons come and like are looking for the adventurers and stuff like that. Would that potentially be like a story beat in that sense where you
S-
can potentially there's a potential for them to get information from said goons, you know, about the big bad if possible and kind of pushing them to drive them
Sure.
towards
I mean,
that?
here's the thing, and this is, the interesting thing is you can go through multiple story arcs on the way to completing the whatever story it was you were looking to tell for those characters. Um, there's nothing saying that the players need to know who the big bad is right
Right.
away. I mean,
Yes.
when you want that to become clear, it's completely up to you.
Mhm.
Um, you might want to throw again. You might want to throw hints. Um, there can be things that say you're um one is a tale of conquest, and you're basically trying to keep someone from being able to take over the world. It may be rumors of war. There may be sign of increased military activity. They may the party may ride past a group of knights, either training or camped out. Things that they just note. You can build on it. They can increased activity. They hear things, increased activity. The rumor mill is one of those things where I have a love hate relationship with it
Yes.
because I feel like you have to have like as many false rumors as there are true rumors.
True rumors. Yeah, because they can take that rumor and run with it like nobody's business.
And yeah, and if you do the false, enough false rumors, um, you almost have to have a way for them to be easily disproven. Otherwise, they're going to get a party that's frustrated because they spend a lot of time chasing down something that's definitely fake.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Who said this one? Wiley Hobbit says, "What about the chance to redeem a villain? That's always a good twist." So I personally have never had that option. Have you ever had that, Rob, as a player or as a DM?
Uh, I think that basically, what I'm finding is that seems to be like the story arc for everyone currently playing Curse of Strahd. They all want to redeem Strahd.
Yeah,
Like, okay. I mean, yeah, sure. Hey, listen, if the DM's open to playing that, that's
yeah,
fine. I think he's a little bit beyond that, but that's okay.
I agree.
Um, but
Yeah, he seems like a hard one to turn around. That is a tall ask. I agree.
I think for the ultimate big bad, it's a very very tall ask. You can have story arcs where the boss along the way is potentially someone that you could uh turn from whatever it is they're doing.
Mhm.
You find yourselves in the middle of a fight between two factions, and it's a matter of figuring out a way of brokering peace, even if you were, even if the players found that they were on one side versus the other. Uh, it it depends on how far you want to go with the idea of redemption. I mean, if it's a fallen hero that is the BBG of your thing, that's yeah, then you have more options. I think you have because that they had it in them once. It's a matter of getting them to see the light, to see the wrong thing that they're doing.
Yeah. I think a lot of my difficulties or struggles with story arcs again is just knowing whether or not the story arc I have written or that I am telling is satisfying enough or big enough, I guess, for the story that I'm telling.
Um, my suggestion there is I wouldn't worry too much about it. Keep going. If the players look like they're having fun, keep it going until the next idea comes to you.
Right.
Because if you know where you eventually want to be, you know, always and forever, the main thing is making sure that everyone's having fun, that you're having fun. You want to be having fun running the game. You want the players having fun playing the game, that they're enjoying their characters, they're enjoying the story. So if it seems like you're trying to figure out how to get to that, play out whatever it is happening at the time to its conclusion. And when you get that next idea, figure out how you can start sprinkling things in.
Okay.
The hints, you can always start laying the groundwork for the next story in the current story arc. I've done it both ways where the next story was ready to go. They were already, they already had a kind of idea where the next thing was going to be, or
Mhm.
the current story arc wrapped up and it kind of told them who the next thing was. But I've also had times where, I'm not entirely sure what's next for them, so we're just going to do an interlude.
Yes, yes.
Little one shot, little not a one shot in the sense of not a one shot in the sense of disposable characters and such, but
Mhm. Side
I
quest, kind
used
of almost like side quest, kind of? Is that what you're
yeah,
thinking of? Yeah.
really. I used for my campaign, the only part of that was not homebrew was between the second and third book of the campaign.
Mhm.
I threw in White Plume Mountain.
Oh, White Plume is good. I like White Plume.
It's a very very self-contained adventure. It's part of the Greyhawk setting,
Yep.
um, and it has a very interesting story. A very interesting hook in the fact that there are unique sentient weapons that have gone missing.
Yes. Find them. Yeah.
We know where they are. Please try to retrieve them, and untold treasure will be yours.
Will be
And,
yours.
and by the way, if you're ever looking to motivate, the idea of potential for magic items and gold usually works.
Usually works, yeah, depending on your players and things like that and what they want and what their goals are. Amanda said, "Could you treat your story arcs like chapters uh in
Absolutely.
your overall story?" Yeah.
I think maybe I'm not getting that point across well enough. But yeah, you want to call it chapters, books? Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're looking at. They're pieces. They're kind of self-contained, but still part of the larger story.
Mhm,
There's a point where you realize this particular piece has come to its conclusion or has a conclusion, but there's still more to do.
mhm. And I think too with what Amanda's saying is also like when you play D&D, you're collaboratively telling a story together. And maybe the main story isn't the focus right now and something that's happening either with the players or whatever can is now the central focus of what you guys are doing as a group. And you can have many little arcs and stories within the story itself that still kind of progress along. And like you say, you're just kind of interweaving stories together, whether that's your backstory and things like that, and integrating it with the main story.
Sure. And Amanda mentions the Adventure Zone did little events during interlude sessions where people leveled up, got new gear, and all kinds. Yeah, I mean, listen, if you ever need a break, the players resupplying, learning new skills, doing some shopping it makes for a break. Obviously, I'm finding that a lot of players like that, especially if they have a chance to spend all that gold that they've just acquired.
Yes.
Finding a way to use some of that stuff. And here's the thing, story arcs. It's a fine line between the character arc versus the story arc for this, but the idea is, depending on what type of character is, there may be an advancement that comes at certain points. So these are I don't want to get into the character specific part of it, but it's also ways to help motivate. If there is a goal for them, uh, that can tie into the story even better. A
Right.
knight needs to, have proven themselves, or in some manner, or a cleric needs to have, uh, preached the word of their church to, a certain number of
To the
people, or whatever the
masses.
case
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Right, right,
or
right.
or performed acts of, come on, some kind of acts of service. Uh,
Yes.
there's and that's actually there's another important part. And now that I think about it, we need to have. I think we may have done this at one point. But a conversation about organizations,
Yes.
because organizations are a great method for helping to drive the story if the players are part of them, whether
Right.
it's the church that the cleric or the paladins belong to. Is it a druidic circle? Is there an organization of rangers and scouts and such? Um, it Political lines.
Yes.
Are the players, is this a political game, and do they have contacts within the city, country, kingdom, whatever the case may be?
Mhm. And I think again, what Necromantic DM is talking about, it's very difficult to kind of talk about story arcs in D&D without kind of dabbling into character arcs
Sure.
because it's very, they're kind of they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're trying not to dabble into it. That's why we have a second episode going over character arcs, but we will dabble kind of back and forth in between both, obviously, in these next two lore masters. Um, Somebody asked a question. Oh, Pat66, excuse me, about having multiple arcs running at the same time, and some that are contained in one chapter while others spans across multiple chapters.
Oh,
I think,
absolutely.
yeah, as a DM, I think that's the first thing that you learn is how to think on your feet and be flexible because you never know what your players are gonna throw at you. And I don't feel like you have to get stuck on finishing and completing a singular story or story arc before moving on to the next one. You can always have multiple on the go at the same time, obviously within reason, and then they have to kind of decide, I guess, prioritize which one is more important to them at the time. And I think that's a good thing with you're talking about story beats and stuff like that to try to encourage the players and prioritize the main storyline or whatever have you at the moment or at the time.
I agree. It's definitely a good tool if you're able to juggle those stories and figure out how to keep the one in focus while starting to build the other one. It's a great thing to have in your DM's toolkit, because it easily leads them to what's next, and
Right.
it gives them that feeling, layers within layers to the story.
And they could tie into like together as well. If we're talking about like character arcs and story arcs and just having multiple arcs at the same time, I think a good example would be Argus and Rowan. And that character art about or arc about their relationship developing, and then spoiler alert, take your headphones off if you need to.
Excuse me while I begin weeping on.
I'll give you a quick 3 2 1. um that relationship between Argus and Rowan definitely was its own character arc on its own, but also still tied to the main story in regards to, you know, Argus is now because his wife is dead, literally willing to just take anybody down to
Uh,
avenge his wife. So I mean, character arcs and having multiple arcs can actually do lead in, even if they're separate, can lead in and feed back into the main storyline as well, if you kind of guide it the right way.
Absolutely, and yeah, excuse me while I begin weeping uncontrollably.
I know, it's so sad.
Still hurts.
No. I can't watch it yet. I'm not ready to watch it
No,
again yet.
I have not gone back and watched.
No.
I refuse to watch.
Yes. again, yeah, it did yes, you're right, it does depend on how you define a separate story arc, and like you said, I think with in the sense where if you're writing something on your own, I think you are able to kind of have that story arc more defined. The thing with D&D is you are collaboratively writing a story together. So, there's now you're thinking about multiple writers. And I say writers because storytellers. All telling the same story at the same time. So you will run into issues or not issues, but situations in which you will have multiple arcs going on at the same time. Just at different speeds and if you allow them time to breathe in the right setting and the right time, they can all kind of finish come to a completion where you start the arc and then finish it.
By the way, spoiler alert: the
Mhm.
character arcs in them of themselves tend to be, they're story arcs within story arcs.
Yes. Yes,
So
yes, yes.
so yeah, you are. I mean, the layered approach. Um, you know, there's definitely something to that. I It's also a matter of I think to me where I separate the character arcs versus the story arcs is what is the story arcs for this portion are the things that are important to the entire party versus the arcs that are more central on that character. Now they can be
Right.
they still may be you still hope they'd be important to the party, but it's that character is at the that character and their motivations and their backstory is at the root of it.
Yes. I agree. While we have a second here for a brief pause, I'm going to be a good host and say one more time that we do have a giveaway going on today for the Oracle Story Generator Tarot size cards. I can't remember how many cards there are in here. Robert, do you know offhand?
I do not. Um,
Oh, okay. I'm not sure which one it is. I think it's this one. One deck has a tarot size deck of your choice that contains 60 deck cards that contains over 250 million possible story combinations. These theme options include contracts and bounties, epic adventures, political intrigue, relics and artifacts, and simple side quests. So if you haven't already, please make sure that you enter hashtag BlueBoxRPG in the chat for your chance to win. Did I do a good job? Hosting?
very nice.
I could bring up the modern Shira as a good example of what Rob was talking about. Rob,
Um, okay.
yes, you may.
I know that they had done a modern thing, but I had not seen it. I have not
Okay.
seen it yet, honestly. So I can't comment too much on it.
Okay. There we go. I threw the Kickstarter link in the chat if you guys want to check it out for yourself. The art looks beautiful. I really like it. It looks very nice. And also like the size of it is really nice too, good for travel and stuff like that if you're it's just kind of something that you can bring with you if you need to if you're DMing elsewhere or whatever. But I think it's good resources. And we touched upon this before in an LMA about just kind of looking for resources for storytelling and character, story arcs, character arcs, things like that. There's a lot of online resources. The giveaway, the Oracle Story Generator, is also a good resource. Talking to other DMs about how to kind of progress your story arc or whether or not if you're kind of questioning whether or not your story arc is worthy for your players worthy enough for your players.
Let me see. Can add the image.
Is it all three, Amanda? Oh, Amanda has a picture
Yeah,
of
I'm adding that now.
okay, Rob is going to throw that up in a hot minute here, which is
Oh, that's
actually
very
really
large.
nice. Perfect. Oh, perfect for this story or this version of LMA that we're talking about. Topic, I should say. Oh, and it comes in a single box with dividers to keep everything organized. That's really nice. Look at that. See, that art is so nice. I really like that.
Hmm.
Robert's gonna move it all.
Yeah, we can
Move it all away.
leave it there for a few
Hmm.
seconds.
Isn't it? It's so pretty. I really like it. It's very, very nice. I agree. Yes. There you go. Thank you for entering the giveaway.
All right.
Uh
And go bye-bye.
and goodbye.
Uh,
Oh, that was the one that you ordered. That's really nice. They look really nice. They look very, very nice. I like them. Um, okay. Story arcs?
right.
Ask a
So
few
did we
story arcs.
have any more in the chat? Let me see.
I don't think I saw any more questions in the chat. Again, feel free to ask questions in there or share your stories, story arcs that you liked or things that you find interesting as a player or as a DM, things that you like to run yourself, or just things you like to see as a player in regards to story arcs and things like that. Um, Depends on why your players are gathered around your table. The group wants to tell an engaging story is different than a group that enjoys hanging out during master arcs. That's totally true. I think, again, like you have to engage in, and I think that's a good point that you bring up because Mike, because Robert was saying that too, where as long as your players are having fun, then I think you don't need to be so hard on yourself. Easier said than done as a DM. I know it's very difficult to, especially in a homebrew setting, I find to make the story engaging enough. But sometimes, your players will have a whole heck of a lot of fun doing absolutely nothing for, for 3 hours. And none of the actual storyline was being told, but that's actually really fun. Um, Robert,
All
were
right,
you
so
gonna say
Amanda
something?
mentioned, how do you decide where story arcs start or a story starts and how to bring that to a close to create your arc? Like, when is enough for that arc?
And again, I think that again would be kind of fitting to your players. But it's a lot very situational because you have to see how fast your players are wanting to progress and how
No, that's just
how
me talking too much and my
yes.
throat drying out. Sorry about
Yes.
that, everyone.
That's okay. Yeah, I think it kind of depends on situation. It's very situational on your players and how quickly they're wanting to move through the storyline or how slowly. Because it could either go either or. And I think you kind of have to play it by ear, depending on your players and just how the rhythm of the campaign is going thus far.
Now, for
Robert?
as far as like where a story starts, I mean, it could be as simple as that NPC. Yeah, that NPC that gives them that quest, or it does something that impacts sends them on some kind of adventure. Uh, you know, one of the interesting things to me has always been, I look at something like Lord of the Rings, and you think of this massive, epic tale of getting to Mordor. From starting from being in the Shire at Bilbo's party, and them going to Mordor. Um, there's the interesting thing is the first kind of story arc was just them getting to the inn and meeting, and meeting Aragorn, where they thought they were going to meet Gandalf. They
Yes.
were they were there. It was a whole self-contained adventure that consisted of nothing more than them leaving the Shire and trying to get to the meeting with Gandalf. You Um, they got there. Gandalf wasn't there, but Aragorn was. So what was the next? What was the next uh, portion of it? It was them getting to Rivendell. Right.
Getting to Rivendell.
I mean, those particular things, those are completely, in the grand scheme of things, they're small pieces of it. But thanks, Jay. Yeah, we will see you soon. But those pieces of it, the characters were not expecting any more than this was their adventure. They were trying to get to Gandalf. They were trying to get to Rivendell. And then things happened, and well, it kind of went off from there.
Yeah. So that's a good point. A good kind of send off to Amanda's question about do we not have to finish? Do you not have to have your arc pretty much created start to finish so that you have direction and then let your players flesh it out? Again, like you say, I think you can have a generalized idea of what you want to do and what the arc is going to look like. But kind of as you say, like I said, I had at the very beginning, I thought that I had to flesh out everything and have all of everything all written down and knew exactly what was happening, which I actually ended up learning personally for me that it wasn't something that I needed to do because it was a lot of wasted effort and time because not necessarily your players aren't actually always going to go in the direction in which you're kind of pointing and leading them to. And I do know that I have talked to John a lot about it just out of curiosity, plain curiosity, because John has been DMing for so long and also streaming his games and multiple games at a time. What John typically does is he has a whole bunch of different storylines or story arcs that he has on hand depending on the direction in which the players are kind of going. He obviously has his main story arc, and I think it was who was it? Dark Elf that said about kind of like a tree branching out, right? I really like that analogy. Um, so in that sense, yeah, like you can technically have a loose based story arc and kind of let the players kind of guide that story however much you please. Like I said, Rob and I are typically two DMs who don't really like to railroad. So I think in that sense we'd be more flexible in the stories. And I'm sure, Rob, have you had story arcs that you've maybe written and kind of just abandoned because it just didn't really either make sense to the story or it wasn't very important, whether it be big or small story arcs to your players and kind of just ditched that one and left that one alone and then just started something different or moved in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I've had adventures where I realized that whatever it was I was doing wasn't really working. For whatever reason, the players didn't seem to engage. And thankfully, I picked up on it kind of early
Mhm.
so that I was able to um, flex off to something else without it being suddenly this big gaping hole. Is like, well, okay, you know, all the stuff has been set in motion, but I've just kind of left it there.
Yes.
I mean, you go where in a lot of ways you go where the players take you. Now, one of the tricks that I use is, when I create NPCs for the story, I don't necessarily tie them to a specific location. I know where I'd like them to be.
Yes.
I might have them elsewhere.
Yeah.
Um, but the other problem is there's a question of, you never know which of your NPCs they're going to really engage with. So
Right.
sometimes,
Yes.
yeah, sometimes you wait until you find out do they like this NPC before you
Mhm.
bother, trying to draw them in with the thing.
With a quest. Yeah, especially if like, "I don't like you anyway. Why would I do the quest that you're asking me to do?" Yeah. I think a question that I wanna ask you in regards to story arcs is not necessarily homebrew, but have you ever ran modules in which, I find with modules, it's a little bit different, it's a little bit trickier in regards to keeping and maintaining that story arc because there's not as much flexibility, I guess, in a homebrew, because there is, a story that's being told there.
So with modules, I think with modules, there's kind of an understanding that this is the adventure.
Mhm.
Um, However, you as a DM, you have to be willing to take a look at the adventure and say, okay, is this working? Do I need to make changes to the way this is run? I will never look at an adventure, rarely ever look at an adventure and do it completely as written, just because
Right.
there's either some of the stuff may not make sense. It may not make sense to this particular group of players. May not it may not make sense to me, honestly. What are they trying to do here? Sometimes, and sometimes I don't. I'll say there's sometimes where I'll flat out say I really, really don't like how they handled this. Um, I've had that heck happen a couple of times lately. Both as a player and a DM looking at an adventure saying, "What? what is this and why does this make sense to anyone?
Right.
Um, so you need to have the flexibility to adjust. I think the tougher thing for pre-planned adventure, adventure paths or campaigns or however you want to call them, is that's where it becomes harder to figure out how to fit the character's story arc into them.
Yes.
Because you only have so much flexibility, and it's hard to ask your players to give you, you know, a detailed backstory if there's going to be no room in the adventure to use it.
Right.
Which is why I tend to do, I don't know. I've been fiddling around with Pathfinder, and I may eventually do a Pathfinder adventure path just to see how I like it.
Mhm.
But I tend to do more homebrew with standalone adventures in them if I need something.
Yes.
Just because you're in, you're out, and you can find a way to tie it into the greater story, or again, you can do it like I did with White Plume Mountain, just make it an interlude.
Yes, in an interlude. Um, I can't remember who mentioned that, but, about redeeming the villain. Actually, I did that was my mistake. I did lie about that. There was a I did run a campaign now that I'm thinking about it, where there was a possibility to redeem, the big bad, which was actually modular, and I think it is in I can't remember which one it is. I read it recently or whatever. It's the book that has, like, it's the alternative cover is, like, purple and, like, in pink and stuff like that. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. However, that one, I think in regards to what I was mentioning, there was. So I had there is a story arc in that in regards to modular, and that's why I was thinking about asking you that question, because I found with modular, I was having the issue where it was this a story beat, and essentially um, a person that an NPC right, I did redeem the overcourt, that is true. So maybe I am a liar. I just don't remember. So it was a story beat in which they were supposed to be giving information about the big bad, which was maybe not like the big bad wasn't actually the big bad. There was, a story behind it and he was being, taken his body was being taken over by somebody else and yada yada yada, and he was cursed. Um, and it was difficult in the sense where excuse me, my players completely bypassed this NPC who would have given them this information that you know what I mean, that this big bad actually isn't a big bad and it's not his fault and it's like a generational curse, and so I was like I said, this was that campaign where they were essentially trying to drive us. The analogy I did was I'm like, you guys are driving a semi truck down the Macy's Day Parade. Like you're not
Jeez.
moving anywhere fast. There was a whole festival going down, and they were trying to just drive this carriage, like full blown, like fancy carriage that they stole like just down the middle of the street and was expecting to like be able to go like 90 miles per hour. You know what I mean? Down the parade. I'm like, no, you guys aren't moving fast. You're moving slow because everybody's standing there. Like nobody, you know what I mean? And so luckily, and again, you have to kind of look at your players and their backstories and things like that to kind of have them inclined to kind of pick up these moments. So I just had this lady kind of looking really sad on the street to one of my very lawfully good do-gooder players who happened to catch her eye, and actually he jumped off the carriage while the others just was like, okay, well, see you later then if you're going to jump off, but they weren't moving that fast, so he was able to get that information at the end. But I think that's in tail where I'm talking about story arcs and story beats and essential trying to get player information to kind of drive the story, and deciding whether or not, like in that situation, like do you just decide not to give them that piece of information because they're uninterested, or do you still try to find a way to get that information? I think that's a lot of my struggles as a DM in regards to story arcs. Just like you feel like because you know the story, you want to give them this information, but maybe it's not very important to them. And it's like, how important is it to you to try to make it work.
I guess that depends on what you think of the consequences of them never getting that information.
I mean, like, he was gonna die, but, because they would've just killed him, right? And then, like, found out the sad story later. I just you kind of have an idea. I think as a DM, I don't know if you do this too, but I kind of have an idea of an end result. And, obviously, it doesn't always go that way, but you have to at least try to drive that story.
I think I am more the ending, maybe not the result, but what the final confrontation or what the final goal is, and they may make it, they may not. They may
Yeah,
fail. They can fail at the end. Hey, life goes
that's
on,
true.
and
On to the next adventure.
on to the next set of characters, because that usually means everyone's dead. Um, but it depends on where. I mean, you bring up the point of again finding ways to feed them that information. If it truly if you truly want them to find out, it's just a matter of how obvious you want to be about getting it to them.
Right,
Maybe there's a potential lore object somewhere that they might find that has the information. If it's a curse, it might be in a book somewhere.
yeah.
Something that they could find a reason they could find. Um, it's tricky, but yeah, when you know where you want to get to, you just realize that as long as your players are having fun with it, you've got
Yes,
time.
right.
Just don't feel like you need to rush. And I think that's the most important part, like story arcs and an overall story campaign is unless you are on a set number of sessions, you've decided that you're playing for a set number of sessions, well then you're not in a rush to get from A to,
Point A to
whatever.
from
Um
point A to point A1 and figure 8 2 and
Yeah,
good things.
I mean, the journey is every bit as important as whatever
The
the final
destination.
ending is.
Yes.
Um, and you understand where the players need to be in terms of what do they need? Are there items that they need to get along the have obtained along the way? Are there certain levels that they need to have in order to even reasonably able to fight the final battle, whatever case may be?
Right.
Um, you know, is there a journey that they have to undergo? Are there things in their personal arcs that they need to have resolved in order to get there? Are there organizations that they have to join? Figure out what all those things are, and that'll kind of help inform what the story, what the individual pieces of the story are, and help you drive them forward. So because these are the things that need to happen, and your individual story is probably going to be, whether the players realize it or not at the time, doing those things that they need to do so they're, ready for whatever the finale is.
Yeah. That makes sense.
All right. And with
Okay.
that, we are coming up on 8 o'clock, and I know Lord Gazumba is live, but I also know that he does his promos at the beginning. So we are going to do the giveaway shortly.
Yes. So if you haven't already, please put in hashtag BlueBoxRPG for your chance to win the Oracle tarot cards, which are storytelling cards that help you write stories. Um, whether that is stories for your campaign or side quest, whatever you may have planned. They are tarot cards. It seems like, what did they say? Over 250 million combinations per deck for all fantasy role playing games, writers, and storytellers. The art looks super awesome. So if you want to be entered into the giveaway, please make sure you put in hashtag BlueBoxRPG in the chat. And then Rob will be
All
drawing
right.
for it very shortly.
Yep, we are going to do it now. And I don't know if it automatically announces for me.
I'm not sure, but we can.
Oh, let's see. Rolling
Figure it
for
out
it.
anyway. That's my drum roll. Manda.
Oh boy!
Hashtag Patrogs never wins.
Wow.
That's awesome. Look at that. Look at that. That is an awesome box set. They actually do have a Kickstarter, so if you guys are still interested in these cards, feel free to join the Kickstarter. That is awesome.
Man, I want to point out that my birthday's on Saturday. You know, just saying.
Hint, hint, hint. Nudge, nudge, nudge. Just kidding.
All right.
Congratulations, Manda.
Yeah, congratulations, Manda. So let me clear
That's a
that out.
beautiful set. That is very nice.
All right, cool. That is cleared out. So with that, I want to remind everyone that we have things that are coming up.
Yes.
First of all, Friday night we have Friday Night Crusades. The party has done quite a number on the Earth cultists and are currently, trying to take some time away from the temple itself to get some rest and reload on spells and things because they've had to use quite a bit of it. So we will see where they, what they do next and what awaits them when they get back. That is Friday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern here in Discord.
Yes.
You are more than welcome to join in, create a character. Join our Discord in the F-N-C info channel is all the information you need to create a character. Otherwise, you're welcome to listen in on the game. Please, we love having people listen to us play. On Sunday, I think it's at 1 o'clock Central, 2 o'clock Eastern. Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong. Kurt will be running a Castles and Crusades game.
Oh, fun.
This was supposed to be the second part of a 2-shot. I think it's now a 1-shot. I'm not entirely sure what's happening with that, but
Okay.
should be a lot of fun. I don't think am I correct that there's no Fall of Red Dawn this weekend?
Amanda? I'm pretty sure I didn't see it on the no, there is not. Okay. We're doing the second part and skipping the first part. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Amanda.
And then Tuesday at 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, I will be running a CNC 1-shot here. Again, still looking for 1 or 2 players, so please hit Manda or me up in Discord. And then next Wednesday, Vivi and I will be back for I think it's going to be the finale of the player takeover. I think John will be back after that. The Mad Chatter guest host takeover. But we will be doing character arcs, so more arcs, plenty of arcs, all the arcs.
Yes. All the arcs and the what's the opposite of an arc? And the not arcs and the unarcs. If you guys have any stories you guys want to tell us or questions you guys want to ask, feel free to message Rob or I, and we can bring them up in chat or in our next LMA.
Absolutely.
Like.
So once
the
again,
anti-arc. The arc.
Arch arc.
Is
that the overarching arc? What?
Or the underarching arc.
It took an hour and a half, but we finally got to the punny business.
Yes, we did.
I appreciate you all. Vivi, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you
to all the Mad Chatters for showing up and chatting and being so active. Thank you to our wonderful mods for all that you do. And we are raiding Lord Gazumba now. Sir. Get those raid emotes ready in 3, 2, 1. Bye now.
Bye. Ta-da! We did it, Robert.